and welcome to my channel. For the first time after years of being asked, I am finally going to talk publicly about one of the world's most notorious serial killers, John Wayne Gacy. This series of videos will feature my memories and interactions with him, his family, and several of his victims. My nightmares primarily stem from the apartment building where my grandmother lived at 6114 West Miami Avenue in Chicago, Illinois. Marion Gacy, John's mother, also lived in this building for some time as well. This is only the beginning of my experiences. Please keep watching to learn about it all and so much more. I also have nightmares about what might possibly be buried at the Miami Avenue apartment building. John was the maintenance person for the apartment building, and several strange things occurred during that time frame. At the time, there were no real concerns, just curiosity. Questions like why we would go to bed one night with a gravel parking lot and wake up the following morning to discover the parking lot had been paved. Why were trenches dug and landscaping done at 2 a.m.? Why, when there was a plumbing problem, did the laundry area have new concrete poured in and then we were asked to stay away for a few days to let it set, but we're still having plumbing issues? These types of things were all done in the middle of the night. When asked, John's answer was always that it was the only time he could do it since he was busy doing the jobs that paid during the day, and he wasn't going to use any help because it would cost him too much in payroll. I am not ashamed to say that I was spoiled by my grandma. I was the youngest of her 19 grandchildren with roughly 20 years age difference between her first one and me, and about a 4-year gap between me and the next one, who was of course a boy. In actuality, there were 4 of us who were girls and the rest boys. The girls were much older than me, and most times the boys didn't want me hanging around and would either ditch me or pick on me until I left them alone. My grandma always took care of me and would play games and entertain me so I wouldn't be upset. As I grew a bit older, I stopped being so easy to be pushed away from my cousins, and not only did that allow me to grow closer to them, it also taught me how to play sports, become friends with some of their friends, and it also showed me what being protected meant. But this was all during family gatherings, which were often, but not always. At home, it was just me and my brother, who was 5 years older than me and always busy with school, sports, and his friends. My parents both worked full-time, so I decided to keep going to my grandma's when we had school breaks or vacations and for summers. I would spend weeks at a time there, and I laugh now about it all now, but back then my parents would actually come there to visit me instead of making me come home. I loved being there. I loved being with her. I had many friends in her area and was always able to find something to do, and as I grew older, my grandma would let me do things I know full well my parents wouldn't have, like go wherever I wanted, as long as I was home by the time the street lights were on, without her having to know exactly where I was. She allowed me to take buses to places like Axel Roller Rink as long as I had others with me, and go to Tasty Hasty, places no longer around. The downside of all the time I spent at my grandma's is the fact that I met Gacy. I met his mom. I met his sisters. I met Carol, his second wife, and her 2 daughters. I met several of his victims. I met several of his friends. I met several of his employees. He used to take me, his mom, and my grandma shopping and out to dinner. 2 of my brother's friends from the area ended up in his crawl space. I had been in his house. I had been in his car. I had been to a party. I had been to his barbecue not knowing there was a body underneath. I met several other employees who fell victim to him. That man even babysat me a few times, for lack of better words, so I wasn't alone in the building while his mom and my grandma would go play bingo. But I will say this: that man never touched my brother or any other family member ever. Thank goodness. News outlets at the time reported that retired Chicago police officer Bill Dorsch stated he had reason to believe there might be more victims buried in the grounds of an apartment building on West Miami Avenue in Chicago, where Gacy had been the caretaker for several years. In 1975, Dorsch, then a Chicago police officer, observed Gacy, whom he knew on a casual basis, holding a shovel in the early morning. When Dorsch confronted him, Gacy said he was doing work that he was too busy to do during the day. Dorsch also said that several other residents of West Miami Avenue stated they had seen Gacy digging trenches at the property in the early to mid-1970s. At that time, Gacy was still married to Carol Hoff. In March 2012, Cook County Sheriff's officials submitted a request to excavate the grounds of this property. The Cook County State's attorney denied the request, citing a lack of probable cause, including the results of a 1998 search of the property. However, the sheriff's office noted that in 1998, a radar survey suggested 14 areas of interest within the grounds, yet only 2 of these had been excavated. 4 of those remaining were described as being staggeringly suggestive of human skeletons. This is the same exact building. I went there in June 2024 to take this to show you the building, the parking lot and the back area, still the same. This is Gacy as Pogo the Clown at a few events. These are photos of Gacy and Carol and a few with his mom from his wedding. Several family members were there. I was not. Even Carol said later she could never figure out why he married her. He didn't really have any interest or desire in her or what married couples should be doing. His mother, Marion, was such a kind and loving lady. She was also dealing with a lot of health issues. Her husband had passed away a few years earlier, so when John was paroled to Illinois, he moved in with her. This is from Maryhill Cemetery, where both John Sr. and Marion Gacy are buried. Some of Gacy's victims are buried here as well, but I will go into more detail in future videos. And here is the infamous house with the grass showing 76 for the bicentennial party he had at his home for the celebration. Me, my grandma, and a few other family members, friends, and even 2 future victims attended. Little did I know what was underneath. Several of his business cards he gave out to as many people as possible, including my grandma and my parents and several relatives. These are a few photos from a couple of parties he had. This photo in particular still haunts me to this day and makes me sick. This was from a barbecue he had at his home to show off the new barbecue pit he made in his yard. Me, my grandma, a friend of my grandma's, another relative of mine, and his own mother attended. Little did any of us know that he had built that barbecue pit to cover up a body he buried underneath it. Much of the food shown in this photo was cooked on top of that grill. I myself, many years later, heard his mom say that was one of the most disturbing things her son did. It was bad enough that he did all those things to all those young men, but to then boast about something he built over one of them, and then had people over to eat what he cooked was like rubbing it in everyone's faces and making us all suffer even more from what he did. That was one thing she never forgave him for. Hard to believe he could look at his wife like that, or any woman, and it all be fake. This was one very good example that everyone believed he loved her. Looking back, a very good look at how deceitful he was right before your eyes, and you had no idea. Several different photos of him dressing as Pogo the Clown to entertain kids at parades, hospitals, parties, and holidays. He also was the clown mascot for Bressler's 33 flavors of ice cream and did appearances for them as well as commercials. Kind of sick that he ended up with 33 victims as well. Here are some pictures and videos about just some of the victims. A few I knew very well, including going to Axel roller rink with one in particular, several different times. A few I knew casually and a couple that I saw around but had no interaction with besides maybe a hi. And many I didn't know, had never seen or even heard of until this case. I am not going to touch on too much about the victims just yet. The next video I put out will most likely be all about them since so many of their stories were overshadowed by this monster's acts, and people should, at the very least, hear about the lives they lived, the people they were, and not just their ending and how they were ended. I think these pictures say enough for now, but I promise, their stories are coming soon. Here are photos of many more victims. Again, much more to come about them all. Please keep an eye out for Gacy's victims, more than just a number. I hope to put that up very soon. 'Ken Parker and Mike Marino were best friends who went missing together, and sadly were found buried in Gacy's crawl space in the same shallow grave. Mike's mom always insisted that the body pulled from there was not her son because the items of clothes she said did not match the last clothes she knew he wore. In 2016, she had him exhumed and DNA did come back as not his DNA. Although the coroner's office has said they accidentally mislabeled the bones, and the bones identified were that of his best friend who he was buried alongside of, Ken Parker. The bodies had started to fuse together, so I understand why the mother does not want to believe it is her son. I believe it is, and so does the coroner. As anyone who knows this case knows that his last victim was Rob Peast, a 15-year-old high school boy who was working at Nissan Pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois. As I have stated before, I am not going to get into too many details about the victims. That will be the next video, but I do want to point out a few small things about this one right now. As sad as it is that this young man had to lose his life, his disappearance finally brought an end to the reign of terror Gacy was behind. Immediate notification to police. Many people saw and had some interaction with Gacy at this location. Absolutely no doubt in anyone's minds that he did not run away or decide to go somewhere else other than what he went outside to his mom and told her. It was his mother's birthday and he couldn't wait to get off work and celebrate with her. He told his mom he would be back in about 15 minutes, that he wanted to talk to a guy about a different job that was paying much more than what he was making. What teenager doesn't want money? Especially at that age. He had lent his jacket to the cashier since it was freezing outside, and being up front, it was always chilly with the doors opening and closing. After talking to his mom and running back in, he asked her for his jacket so he could run out back and try and catch the contractor before he left. In the haste of it all, she forgot to remove a photo developing receipt she had put in there when she sent off a roll of film to develop through there. Peast flew out the back door after Gacy and was never seen alive again. More coming up about all this in a little bit. Just a scary thing I want to point out. When I set out to do this, I not only wanted to tell you the story, but I also wanted to show you the story, both then and now as best as I could. With doing that, we went to several of the places and took photos and videos. One very scary thing is that Nissan Pharmacy, which is no longer there, was only 3.5 miles away from Gacy's home. 9 minutes away in today's traffic. About 6 minutes back then. That's how secure Gacy felt about not getting caught by this time. Thankfully, he was very wrong. Gacy has admitted to dumping bodies into the river, including Rob's body and 3 others that were confirmed, yet Gacy stated that 4 others were in there, even making the comment that one body that he threw over the bridge landed on a passing barge. What many may not know is that Gacy did have survivors. Back in 1971, when Gacy was paroled here from Iowa after serving time for sodomy on 2 teen boys, things were not as they are these days with everyone knowing everything. He was arrested and charged 2 different times in 1972 for assault on 2 different teenage boys, and at least one more made a report. The police stations taking the reports had no idea about any of Gacy's past, and his parole officer in Chicago had no idea about the arrests. This is why so many believe he started ending them instead of letting them go. There was also another survivor named Jeff Rignall who in 1978 was walking in Rosemont towards a bar and was lured over to Gacy's car with the intention of smoking some weed. Once he was in the car, Gacy quickly covered his mouth with a rag full of chloroform. When he woke up, he was in Gacy's house restrained in a torture chamber. Gacy repeatedly brutally assaulted him with various adult objects, including himself, until he would pass out again. Then Gacy would wait till he regained consciousness and would do it all over again. Finally, Jeff woke up and was no longer at Gacy's house. He was by a statue in Lincoln Park. Because Gacy's crawl space was full. Gacy seemed to focus on certain areas in the first several years of his finding of victims. places like the Greyhound bus station in downtown Chicago, the Aragon Ballroom where many concerts and events were held at and that many teens and young people would hang out at, the L train stations, especially the ones away from busy areas. He would also frequent an area known as Boys Town by Wrigleyville where many gay men would live and socialize at. This is also where many gay bars were located back then. Back then, the city of Chicago would print up a map of the bars that gays were welcome at to try and help stop the violence that was bestowed upon them by others who didn't accept nor understand that type of lifestyle. In fact, to this day, that area is still referred to as Boys Town, and it is where the heart of Chicago pride started and continues to this day. But back then it was a much smaller area, and word spread amongst each other to be careful of a man in a caddy with a spotlight pretending to be a cop, which explains another way to lure his victims. He would also go to a much closer location to where he lived called Jefferson Park. This was considered the hub in the northwest suburbs, as the Metro train would meet there with the CTA train, Chicago Transit Authority, or better known as the L, as well as the Northwest suburban buses. I would actually take the Metro into Jefferson Park and then get on the 56A bus, which would stop right at the corner of Milwaukee Avenue and Miami Avenue, and my grandma would either meet me at that corner or would watch me walk over from her window, since it was about 100 yards or so to the building. What many may not remember or had even realized was that Gacy was not arrested for Peace's disappearance originally. Although the family immediately reported his disappearance to the Des Plaines Police Department, and they took the report seriously and sent officers to Gacy's house to talk to him about it. Although Gacy took a while to answer the door, claiming to be in the back of his house on the phone, which was not true, and did not hear them at the front, he finally did answer the back door and let them in. Granted, about 20 minutes had gone by since they first arrived. They said he seemed calm and let them in and offered them coffee. He talked for a bit and told them his lies. One officer even asked to use the bathroom in hopes of looking around a little better, which Gacy allowed him to do, although he did walk him towards the hallway to the bathroom and was standing there talking to the other officer while the one was in the bathroom. That officer did notice an unusual smell when the furnace came on, but was unable to put a finger on what it was exactly. With neither officer seeing anything unusual and not finding Peace there or anything linked to him at that moment, they had no choice but to leave. That officer stated many times after that evening that he wishes he never had left. It haunts him because Peace was believed to be still alive but unconscious and bound in the attic, which is why Gacy didn't answer the door for over 20 minutes. Not long after the officers left, Gacy took Peace down, finished him off and loaded him in his trunk, and then left to dispose of him under the I-55 bridge into the river, getting stuck in the mud and snow, and had to get a tow out of there, which is why he didn't show up when he said he would for his interview. Although they did not find him at that time, this did bring him front and center, and they wanted him to come in and talk, and Gacy said he would but didn't show up at the time set up. In fact, he showed up around 2 a.m. and had mud all over him. He was told to come back the next day and never did. The police started to follow him everywhere he went, and Gacy did all he could to make a joke out of it, telling people they were his security. At establishments, he would send drinks or food over to them, trying to look like a big shot to whoever he was with. Leaving places if he left at the same time as anyone else, he would make it a point to walk over to the unmarked car and talk to them, and then he would leave and drive like a complete jerk. The walls were closing in on Gacy. He went to his lawyer's office, and after being in there for hours, he left. The lawyer came out and said, "Whatever you do, don't let that man out of your sight." As he drove recklessly throughout the suburbs at high rates of speed and cutting in and out of traffic while on an expressway, when he pulled off to get gas, the detectives saw him put something into the gas attendant's pocket, so they asked what it was. The kid, who had no idea what was going on, reached into his pocket and pulled out a joint. The detectives had enough. They pulled him over and arrested him for driving reckless, speeding, and drugs. Gacy was never a free man from that point on. What you just saw were some photos from the area back then. I am now going to go back to the Peace case and get into what turned out to be the beginning of the end for Gacy. One thing I did love to have seen was the photos of him being held on a psychiatric hold once he got to Cook County Jail, because they kept him restrained to the bed with both hands and feet bound. I wish I knew it at the time, because I would have loved to have asked him how he liked it, although I am sure I would never have made it in to see him, as well as it being so early on in the discovery. Neither I nor the world had any clue what was about to greet them that Christmas. These next photos are from the very start of the search warrant of Gacy's house. These will lead into the inside of his home, with photos showing you the different rooms inside. It will also show you the beginning of the gruesome discovery of the crawl space. I also would like to take a moment and point out that as this video proceeds, we will be getting into some graphic details as well as graphic photos of what they found in that crawl space, so please beware. Some photos that will be displayed in a bit are chilling. These are photos showing them bringing out the bodies. All this searching, digging, excavating, bagging remains, loading the coroner's van, started in December and continued for months. They missed holidays like Christmas and New Year's. They had to leave doors open for ventilation since it was raunchy as soon as they started with the first body. Can you imagine that smell of decay? But they were also doing this in the coldest time of the year, and there was also a blizzard that hit in 1979. That slowed them down some, but it did not stop them. As the constant barrage of people finally started to slow down due to the cold, me and my grandma and a few others would go by there from time to time and bring them coffee and donuts if it was early, or coffee and sandwiches if it was later. All this out of her pocket, and refused anyone who tried to pay her anything for it. And yes, my grandma knew enough people that we were allowed to stop there. We never tried to get in their way, nor did we ever ask to see anything, although we were showed some things as long as we touched nothing. I never wanted to look. But I do remember one time we stopped. They had already dug up most of the floor that was above the crawl space, so I couldn't help but see. We went back at least once more, but I stayed in the car. As I stated a few minutes ago, I will be getting into some graphic images, and that will be starting next. If you wish to not see these images, please feel free to fast forward a few minutes. I will put in the description below the timestamps of this part from the first image to the last. Seeing these photos continues to haunt me because not only have I seen these photos way too many times, I also have seen the real place these were taken at. I also knew some of the victims. I also know in way too much detail what happened to so many of these bodies before they ended up like this. The torture these victims had to endure is horrible. More to come on that later, but to endure that and then to just be disposed of like they were nothing and nobody cared about them is heartbreaking. What most people don't think about is that when this happened, there wasn't just 33 victims. There were several who survived. But there is also all the family members, friends, girlfriends, neighbors, and the list goes on and on about who is affected, and to me, those people are also Gacy's victims. Convicted of 33 brutal sex assaults, 33 homicides, 33 abuse of corpses, 33 cruel and inhumane acts on a victim, and more. But it's a shame he couldn't get convicted of the thousands of more victims for the emotional, mental, and psychological trauma endured because of this case. Again, graphic images starting now. These next pictures show you Gacy's house from start to finish, as it was from the day he was finally arrested, which was December 21st, 1978, until today, August 2024. These next two people I will get into much greater detail in the next video, because they are involved with Gacy and the case, as well as the fact that, although they didn't pass at Gacy's hands, they did pass because of Gacy in general. One from drugs and one from his own hands. This is Michael Rossi and David Cram. They stayed on and off at Gacy's house because they were homeless for a while. They would both do on and off jobs for Gacy when he asked them to and would give them money, drugs or alcohol. Rossi was a runaway from an abusive home, and he was a very nice young man. I had a few different conversations with him, and he even ate dinner at my grandma's a few times. I remember one conversation in particular after this case blew up and the trial was going on, and he was at the courthouse after having already testified he was allowed to be in the courtroom if he wanted. It was also one of the few days I was there, and that was because one of the victims I personally knew was being talked about that day, so I wanted to go. I remember after some of the testimony he got up and ran out the door. I asked my grandma if I could go check on him, and she said as long as I didn't leave the courthouse grounds I could and to come right back. I did catch him outside the building alongside an area, and he was throwing up. With what details I had just listened to, I didn't blame him. But with what details he added, I wanted to throw up as well. I was a couple years younger than him, but I did my best to console him. We had already learned that he was one of the people Gacy paid to dig trenches in the crawl space as well as Cram. But we knew he honestly had no idea why, besides being told there were septic issues, and these areas were needed to try and fix that and get rid of the waste and smell. Plumbing issues. That day in court, He learned that one of the trenches he had built was actually used to bury his best friend, who he had asked Gacy to hire because he really needed to make money, so Gacy did. I don't think he ever realized that, because there were several other areas already dug up, and after learning what Gacy did, he figured they were placed into the older areas that were dug up already. Not the case. Before Gacy had gotten arrested, both Rossi and Cram had left Gacy's house, and they were staying at another co-worker who lived really close to Gacy's because they felt Gacy was losing it from drugs and alcohol, having no idea what was really the reason. When I do the next video, I will explain more about those two young men and what happened to them after all this, as well as what Gacy tried to do to them and how he tried to blame them for it all. To this day, there are still a few victims unidentified that were buried underneath Gacy's home. DART. Cook County Sheriff's Office. Cook County Medical's Records Office. Cook County Coroner's Office and Illinois State Police are still looking to identify them and are hoping to one day finally put them to rest as they should be. If anyone thinks they could possibly have any information at all, even if it is just a guess, they want to hear from you. 2 guesses have already identified 2 victims. I am also happy to announce that one victim who was identified in 2021 and is still buried with a We Remember marker is finally getting a proper headstone with his proper name, Francis Wayne Alexander. Once they do that, I will put a brief video update for you all to see. As I have already mentioned, I will be doing several more videos. Future videos will cover the victims' stories, the trial in much more detail, Gacy's lies and him trying to push the blame on others, Gacy's prison life and the multiple prisons he was in, his execution, the media coverage, newspaper articles, and his interview with CBS in 1992. I also will be covering another survivor who I did not discuss yet on here. I will let him tell his story. I hope you will continue to follow along as I continue going through all this. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen. Until the next video, here is a few small glances.
me with anything. Charge me with complicity in 2 of the murders.
Just 2?
That's all I know about.
That's his story, that he didn't kill anyone. Just an accomplice, he says, and that he helped dispose of 2. One of them, Robert Peast, who was 15 years old when he went to the house on Summerdale. Gacy owned a construction company and invited young Peast to apply for a job.
Robert Peast was killed by another individual in my home.
How did he get to your home?
He was transported to the house by another.
How did the other, whoever he was, kill Robert Peast?
I believe he was strangled.
You were there, right?
Not during the crime, but I was there afterwards, and I watched the removal of the body.
And what happened to the body afterwards? Was one that was that
taken
body
to the
was
river.
put into the river?
It was taken to the river and dumped in the river.
Did you help do that?
Yes, I'm in complicity with that. I've always contended. Don't look at me as an innocent babe of the woods.
Not for a second would I look at John Gacy as a babe in the woods. He may be admitting now only to being an accomplice, but 13 years ago when he was arrested, he confessed to almost everything. You have all the bodies, Gacy said, and there was even a killer map showing where 27 youths were buried. And in fact, he led police to his garage and sprayed orange paint on the concrete to mark the spot precisely where a body was found.
No.
Now he says he was simply marking a spot where some new concrete had been poured.
In regards to going out into the garage, yes, I know I went to the house, and yes, I know I walked in the garage, and they asked me where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. I said, there's the last section where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. They are the ones that took the orange can of paint and said, here, put a mark there. So I put an X there.
So the paint was not to identify the place of burial?
No, it never was. They asked me.
But according to authorities who were with Gacy that morning, he made more than just an X on the floor.
He sprayed a stick figure with the orange spray can in the garage. Not just a mark, a stick figure showing the orientation of the body. Right underneath that stick figure, exactly where he drew it, pointed in the direction he drew it, was the body of John Butkovich.
Yep. And then there's the Gacy confession about how he killed his victims. Strangled them with his now infamous rope trick that police say he demonstrated to them with a rosary bead. He says he was simply discussing knots in general. Catch his sense of humor.
Shoelaces, huh? You're in trouble now.
Yeah, right.
Aren't you afraid sitting that close to me? What the hell? Oh, this is too long. You don't need it this long. Okay. I had a rosary, which I carried in my pocket. I've always carried a rosary. It was my communion rosary. They said, well, what kind of a knot do you use? I said, what do you mean knot? When I tie things up? I says, depending on what I'm using it for, I said, the only thing I ever learned was from Boy Scouts is a tourniquet knot. He said, well, show us what that is. So I took, at that time, and again, it's together, but in order to demonstrate it here, I took the rosary and I said, well, here, you put it around. This is hard trying to do this. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it. And I said, then you put a second knot in it. Okay? Mm-hmm. I said, then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn this. And I says, it causes a tourniquet. I said, that's the only knot I ever learned.
Precisely the kind of knot found on the ropes wrapped around the necks of the victims found under the house on Summerdale. And there was other compelling evidence, including wallets and rings of the victims found in Gacy's home, that leave no doubt whatever he was the killer.
Thank you for watching Gacy, the man behind my nightmare. After having a glimpse into this, would you not agree that with everything I have shown you in here, it is enough to cause anyone to feel the same? With the thought of possible victims hiding under where I spent over 2 decades in and out of, where I laid my head down to sleep countless nights, where me and my friends would run and play in the yard and on the parking lot. We also played in the lower area where the storage/laundry area was, and where he put down fresh concrete for what he said was sewage issues in the middle of the night and was located right beneath my grandma's apartment unit. We played in there if it was raining or if it was too cold to be outside, just like it was a basement in our house. Take that and add it to having been at his home. Having stood above those poor young men's bodies without knowing. Having eaten food made on top of the grill that you find out later had a body buried under it. Having smelled an odor and thinking it was sewage and finding out later it was from the bodies you were standing over, including ones you knew pretty well. All this because of one man. A man we all thought we knew very well. In reality, we had no clue at all, and that is the scariest part of it all. And I am only beginning to get my story out. So once again, welcome to Gacy, the man behind my nightmares. Welcome to the second installment of my Gacy series titled Gacy, the man behind my nightmares, Part 2. The victims, more than just a number. If you have not already seen the first video, please feel free to go and watch that one, as it will explain why I am doing these videos, as well as how I know the information that I know about it. The link is in the description below. Before I continue, I would like to take a moment and remind everyone that this is a horrible story to tell and some details may be graphic. I will try to minimize that aspect as I have done previously, but I also want to be true in telling you who these boys were and what happened to them. I also want to remind everyone that they were more than just the number that was assigned to them as their bodies were located. They were all young. They all had hopes and dreams just like any one of us. Some may have had a troubled life, some may have been looking to make money to survive, some were looking to make money to buy things, 2 were looking to make money for their weddings, 1 was looking to make money for his wife and baby at 20 years old. Some were just looking to party. But none, and I mean none, deserved what happened to them. This part will be the graphic part. If you do not wish to hear the details, please fast forward this video until the next picture shows up, which is about 3.5 minutes. I debated about putting any of this in this video, but I think in order to be as real as I can be about this whole thing, I have to share the real story, and that includes these details. This did not happen to every victim, but it did to many. I will not state what happened to who in any further details, besides what I am sharing now. Gacy ended the lives of at least 33 young men. It is believed there are several more, and Gacy has even said that all of the bodies had not been located. He buried 26 of them in the crawl space, 1 under a barbecue pit he built, 1 under cement in the garage, 1 under the dining room floor, and the rest were thrown into the Des Plaines River. His victims included people he knew as well as others he grabbed off the streets. Some came willingly thinking they were going to drink and smoke. Some came with the promise of a job. But some were also taken by force. Gacy had a fake police badge and a spotlight on his car that he would use to lure victims over and making them think he was the police. He would then take them back to his house and would usually offer them alcohol or drugs. He would tell them about being Pogo the Clown and show them a trick. The handcuff trick. He would put them on himself and then free himself and then tell them to try. Those that did were met with the reality that they had just committed the biggest mistake of their life. Gacy would laugh and tell them the trick is to have the key. Once they were restrained, Gacy would start with the torture to them. This is a watered-down version of what he has admitted originally to have done to many of them. He would sit on their chest, making it hard for them to breathe, so they were forced to open their mouths. You can figure out what for. He would torture them by burning them with cigars, making them act as if they were a horse as he was behind them, pulling on the makeshift reins around their necks. He used himself, he used adult toys, he used various objects. He would frequently shackle their feet to a 2x4 using handcuffs. He also taunted them throughout, including almost drowning several in the bathtub just to revive them and do more. He would then use what he called his rope trick. He would take a rope and make a tourniquet and slowly turn it to apply pressure using a hammer. Occasionally they would convulse for a while before finally passing away. The ones he didn't use the rope trick on, he just shoved something in their mouth, so they asphyxiated on it, usually their underwear. He would then keep many of them under his bed for hours, some even a few days, until he would put them in the crawl space. He would spread quicklime all over the crawl space to try and hasten decomposition as well as mask the smell. Some he even took out to the garage and embalmed them and then buried them. When I do the video about Gacy himself, I will get into more detail about this, but he did work for a funeral home for a brief period in Iowa. All but the last two were believed to have been ended between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. Graphic, I know, but I promise, it is toned down quite a bit. These next few minutes will show you each person that has been identified, and their number in order of them being found. Most in Gacy's crawl space, but there were also a few located in other areas on his property. One in the garage, one under his barbecue pit he built, and one under his patio. There were also 4 recovered from the Des Plaines River in different locations. I think to better understand the whole story, I should try and tell the story in the order they were ended by him. You will see that the amount of time in between the first known victim and the second one, and how it just kept escalating from there. You can also see that so many of these young men look like they could be related. So many looked so much alike. I wouldn't necessarily say Gacy had a type, other than them being young and convenient to his desires at the moment. Timothy Jack McCoy was Gacy's first victim. He was born on May 14, 1955, and was only 16 when he was picked up by Gacy at the Greyhound bus terminal in Chicago on January 3, 1972. He was returning home to Omaha, Nebraska from a holiday trip in Michigan when he met Gacy. It is unclear how he came into contact with Gacy. Gacy claims it was for a paid hookup. They went back to Gacy's house. Gacy stated that, after hooking up, they had a few drinks and had done some drugs, and Gacy nodded off. Early the next morning, Tim woke him up after making them breakfast, and in Gacy's foggy mind he didn't know who it was or why someone was there, and he ended up using a knife on him. Tim ended up passing away from this, and Gacy then buried him beneath the kitchen floor. He later went and put concrete over the area. He claimed to have not called the police because he panicked because he was still on parole out of Iowa and knew they wouldn't believe him that it was an accident. Tim's parents, however, do not think that Tim went with Gacy voluntarily or did anything with him voluntarily. Tim was known to be a down-to-earth young man and always happy and the life of the party. He could also be a little mischievous and was known to hitchhike as well, and his parents think that is how he came into contact with Gacy. In 1972, he had spent Christmas in Iowa with family members before traveling to Michigan to spend the new year with other relatives. He boarded a bus in Michigan to Chicago on January 2, 1973, and had a 13-hour layover before the next bus to Nebraska, and it is believed he decided to look around at the city when he met Gacy. Tim was discovered in December of 1978 and identified by dental records in 1986. He is also the only known victim to have passed from stabbing instead of being strangled. Tim was known as Body Number 9. Gacy revealed that the next victim was in 1974. Gacy admitted to strangling him and then hid him in a closet. He also disclosed that after some time, the body started to leak bodily fluids and stained his carpet, so he then buried him outside and built a barbecue pit over the area that he buried him at. Gacy also stated that after this incident, he learned to make sure and stuff either rags or the victim's own underwear in their mouths to prevent it from happening again. Gacy was also known to stuff items into the anal cavity as well. This victim remains unidentified. He is believed to have been between 14 to 21 years of age, leaning more towards the older range, however, since they think he may have been married due to a ring on the fourth finger of his left hand. He also had brown curly hair. He is believed to have gone missing sometime between 1972 and July 1975. This is John Doe number 1 and is labeled as victim number 28. He was discovered on March 9, 1979. I am unaware of any further information or description on this person, but if you know of anyone at all who went missing in this time frame, it never hurts to notify Chicago about them, because this is still an open case until identified. They all deserve their name to be remembered, so no missing persons report is going to be looked at as stupid. John Butkovich was the next victim. John was born on September 15, 1956 in Croatia. When John was young, they immigrated to the USA for a better life. John was a hard worker, and he was working in a hardware store when he was 16, and he met Gacy there. Gacy offered the teen a job at PDM with a much higher salary, so of course John couldn't say no. He had a long-time girlfriend he was saving up to marry one day. John had a great personality and made friends very easily. He was always polite and would go out of his way to help someone when they needed it. He would stop by the apartment building and ask my grandma if she needed anything, or even Marion Gacy when she was still living there. Please watch the first video for clarification if you haven't seen it yet. The link is in the comment section. John even helped Gacy's sister move to Arkansas. He was close to the whole family, including Gacy's wife at the time and his 2 stepkids. Or so he thought. He also took me to the pool a few times and to McDonald's as well. He would tease me saying he was a better jump roper than me and he was better at hopscotch as well, and would play either for some time before leaving. On July 31st, 1975, John had reached his limit of patience for having not been getting paid for several weeks of work and decided to confront Gacy about it. He was never seen alive again. According to what Gacy said, John and some friends confronted him about his paychecks, demanding to be paid right away, or they were going to kick his ass. They supposedly worked out some arrangement. Gacy stated that they smoked some marijuana and had a few beers and the teens left. Shortly after that, Gacy says John showed back up yelling at him about his money. Gacy says he put him in handcuffs and told him when he settled down he would let him out of them. John told him he would end his life if he didn't let him out of them, but Gacy said, "If anyone is going to die, it's you, John, not me." He also stated that he sat on him at times trying to calm him down, as well as laying down with him for a while, hoping he would go to sleep. Gacy provided no more details as to what happened from that point on as to why he strangled him, but I think we all know why. He put the body in the garage with the thought of burying him in the crawl space as well, but his wife came home from a trip early, so Gacy couldn't put him there, so he put him under cement in the garage. Years later, after being arrested, Gacy would take detectives back to the house and draw a stick figure right over where he put John's body. John's dad later found the car parked near Gacy's with the keys, his jacket and his wallet with $40 in it still in the car, and he knew something was wrong. They contacted the police and even called Gacy themselves. The police talked to Gacy and they believed him over the family, saying John probably ran away because he didn't want to go through with the wedding they were planning. The family called the police over 100 times in the course of 3 years, begging them to investigate Gacy, and the police did nothing. In fact, they refused to take any further calls from them. John became body number 2 and was officially identified on December 29, 1978. He was Gacy's third known victim up to this point, but right after this, Gacy went on a spree, ending 30 more teens within about a 2-year period. Daryl Julius Sampson was born on December 6, 1957. He was also a twin to Harold Sampson. He had been working for a carpeting company in Libertyville, Illinois when he met Gacy. He had been lured there under the pretense of a better-paying job, and since he was saving his money for his wedding, he went there to talk to him about the offer. That was on April 6, 1976. He was identified on November 18, 1979, after having been removed from underneath the dining room floor in between the floorboards of Gacy's house. His mother would spend hours and hours driving around Chicago as well as the suburbs. She called police in numerous surrounding states looking for him. She walked all over downtown Chicago looking. I do want to take a moment and say that the police were not the problem, but sadly, what you will realize as this video goes on, back then the police didn't have the means they do these days. And most teenagers that went missing in the 70s were incorrectly labeled as runaways. They were not taken as seriously as they should have been. In fact, this case in general helped implement the procedures taken nowadays with missing teens. He was labeled body number 29. Randall Wayne Reffitt was born on September 20, 1960 in Lexington, Kentucky. Randall was last seen walking home from school on May 14, 1976. That same day, Sam Stapleton went missing as well while walking home from his sister's apartment. Sam was born in 1961. The two did not know each other prior to this, but they were both located together in Gacy's crawlspace. Randall died from asphyxiation. Sam died from asphyxiation as well. Sam was only 14 years old. Randall was identified on April 12, 1979. He was labeled body number 7. Sam was identified on November 14, 1979. He was labeled body number 6. Michael Lawrence Bonin was born on February 7, 1959 in Chicago, Illinois. He loved playing baseball and painting. He was also very good at fixing things. He had a lot of friends and a very supportive family that believed in working hard. Mike was working at a gas station when he met Gacy. Like most others, Gacy offered him a job at PDM with an unusual high pay wage, so of course he took it. It was perfect. Or so he thought. It was in his neighborhood, so he could walk there. He lived on Northwest Highway, which was minutes away from Summerdale. It was good money. He knew some of the others who worked for him. Mike was last seen on June 4, 1976, as he was supposed to have gone to Waukegan, Illinois, but never made it. His parents got a phone call around Christmas 1978, not long after Gacy was arrested, and was informed they had found Mike's fishing license in Gacy's possession. He was identified on January 6, 1979 through dental records. He was body number 18 and was found underneath Gacy's bedroom, buried with 4 other bodies that were all put there in a very short span of time. William Huey Carroll was born on August 31, 1959 in Chicago, Illinois. Bill carries over from the last victim, Michael Bonin. Bill went missing just 10 days after Mike did on June 14, 1976. He was last seen in what is known as the Uptown area of Chicago, which is an interesting name because the area was actually considered low-income poverty level. Bill came from a rough neighborhood and had alcoholic parents. His older brother became mentally disabled after sniffing glue, and his younger sister was given away to a care home because his parents couldn't take care of her because she also had disabilities. Bill went missing on his brother's birthday. His brother Robert also had his life ended in 1980, shortly after the ending of the trial. Bill was a bit of a troublemaker and had a few run-ins with the police. He got in trouble for using his dad's gun and shooting at the lights. He also got in trouble for pickpocketing and sex work. It is believed that he was solicited by Gacy and made the mistake of going with him. He was found in the same area as Mike was, as well as 3 other bodies. He was identified on March 17, 1979, and was labeled body number 22. James Byron Hawkinson was born on June 10, 1960. He was last heard from by his family on August 5, 1976, after he sadly ran away from them in St. Paul, Minnesota, when he last called his mother on the 5th and said he was in Chicago. It is believed he made that call from Gacy's house. He went unidentified for 40 years until a nephew contacted Cook County Sheriff's Police because he couldn't stop wondering what happened to his uncle he never met. The family submitted DNA and he was finally identified July 6, 2017, although he was discovered December 29, 1978. He was located in Gacy's crawlspace below body number 23, who was Rick Johnston, and above body number 26, which is still unidentified as of today. September 2, 2024, as well as 2 other bodies. He was uncovered still wearing a shirt, underwear, sock remnants, and 2 necklaces. Although his family suspected from the start that he was one of Gacy's victims, they did not have dental records to supply at that time, and DNA was fairly new. Thankfully, though, they finally have an answer on what happened to their son. Rick Johnston was born on September 25, 1958. He was last seen on August 6, 1976, entering the Aragon Ballroom in downtown Chicago as he entered to go see a concert. He was supposed to call his mother afterwards for a ride, but was never heard from again. He was a very active young man and loved playing several sports. He was also known to hitchhike. He actually met his girlfriend from hitchhiking. It was assumed that he tried to get a ride home instead of making his mother come back out to get him, and that is how he ended up with Gacy. He was identified on January 1, 1979, after having been found in a grave under Gacy's house, buried in between 2 other men. He was labeled body number 23. Kenneth Ray Parker was born on December 15, 1959 in Nashville, Tennessee. And Michael Marino, who was born on February 8, 1962 in Chicago, Illinois, were last seen together on Clark Street in Diversity in downtown Chicago on October 24, 1976, at an intersection that Gacy was known to have picked up other victims in an area called Uptown, which was actually a very poor neighborhood. They were just hanging out together and were expected home before 6 p.m. as Michael was supposed to go to the movies with his mother that evening. Sadly, neither was seen alive again. They were identified incorrectly on March 29, 1980. Incorrectly meaning that they were both buried at the same time under Gacy's house, and their bodies had fused together. Mrs. Marino had her son's body exhumed in 2016, and the DNA came back as not his. However, they have determined that when they were found, they were mixed up together and that it is still Kenneth Parker and Michael Marino who were buried together under Gacy's house and labeled bodies number 14 and 15. William George Bill Bundy was born on October 22, 1957. He was an accomplished diver and gymnast at his high school and was well liked by all. He was last seen on October 26, 1976, after he was supposed to have gone out with a friend for a late birthday get-together. He was discovered on December 28, 1978, but was not identified until November 8, 2011, using family DNA. He was also disinterred and was buried in the family plot. His cause of death was asphyxiation. Francis Wayne Alexander was born March 11, 1955 in North Carolina. He moved to New York, had gotten married and had also gotten a divorce before moving to Chicago in 1975 and was working at a bar before going missing, they believe on December 1, 1976, and was 21 when he was ended by Gacy. His remains were discovered in Gacy's crawlspace on December 29, 1978, buried with Greg Godzik and John Sink, and was labeled body number 5. He was finally identified on October 25, 2021, and I am happy to announce is finally getting a tombstone with his name on it instead of this we remember one that he has been buried with. Gregory John Godzik was born on March 23, 1959 in Chicago, Illinois. He is one that for me is hard to talk about since I knew him and his family for several years before he became a victim of Gacy's. I knew his parents. I knew his grandmother. She was actually another friend of my grandmother's. I knew his sister as well. Greg had taken me roller skating a few times with either his sister or his girlfriend. He would also take me out to eat several times. He was an extremely polite young man and he had only been working for Gacy for a few weeks before he disappeared on December 12, 1976. He went missing after dropping off his girlfriend. His wallet was one of the items collected by Gacy. He was identified on December 29, 1978 and was labeled as body number 4. He was located in Gacy's crawlspace in an area with a few other bodies in it. The next victim was John Allen Zink. John was born on December 9, 1957. He was last seen on January 20, 1977. John had been friends with John Butkovich and Greg Godzik, two of Gacy's other victims. He was also a friend to my family. Many times prior to his disappearance, the three of them would do many things together. I would see them numerous times hanging out, playing ball, mowing the lawn at the apartment building on Miami Avenue. John would stop by the apartment and sit and talk with my grandma. He knew my grandma lived alone, so he would run to the store for her if needed. He helped me make my first lemonade stand and helped me sell it so I could buy the roller skates I really wanted without having to ask for money. I remember him talking to my grandma about how his friend just up and left and he couldn't understand why. Greg Godzik. Especially since they both didn't understand why John Butkovich had just left without a word as well. I remember this conversation because it happened on December 26, 1976, when he had stopped by the apartment to wish my grandma a Merry Christmas as well as a happy birthday since it was her birthday that day. He is one I wish I could go back in time and thank for being so kind to my grandma, myself, and Marion Gacy. John had worked for PDM. And just like the others, he was here one day and gone the next. And also, just like the others, the police didn't do anything. They thought he just ran away as well. His parents knew better, but they were ignored. He was labeled body number 3 and identified through dental records in January of 1979. He was buried in the crawlspace on top of one of his closest friends, Greg Godzik. John Prestige was born on November 3, 1956 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He went missing on March 15, 1977. Sadly, I do not know anything more about him or how he could have come into contact with Gacy. He was the first body to be found, and he was identified on January 6, 1979, and was labeled body number 1. Matthew Walter Bowman was born on June 22, 1958, in Chicago, Illinois. He lived in Crystal Lake, Illinois, and was last seen by his mother, Marie Rich, on July 5, 1977, as she dropped him off at the train station. Matt was a very bright young man who was well liked by his peers, even though he was a bit mischievous at times and was a known jokester. He was identified on January 29, 1979, and was labeled body number 8. Robert Edward Gilroy Jr. was born in 1959 and was the son of a Chicago police sergeant. He was last seen on September 15, 1977. He was identified on January 6, 1979 by dental records and was previously labeled body number 25. What is sad about this one is the fact that the cemetery he is buried at originally had instructions to not give out any information about how he died to anyone who asked. John Anthony Mowry was born on March 13, 1958 in Chicago, Illinois. Although all of these stories are sad, and none of these young boys deserved what happened to them, I think this one stands out the most to me. I personally did not know John, but I did meet his mother after Gacy was convicted. My heart still breaks for her to this day. John had just come home after 18 months in the Marines and was going out for a night on the town. That was on September 25, 1977, and he was never seen alive again. His mother was so proud of him because prior to him joining the Marines, he was starting to spiral out of control a bit. He felt guilty because his sister Judy was brutally stabbed 9 times by her boyfriend and passed away from the injuries, and he did nothing to try and prevent it from happening. He had suspected there was domestic violence happening, but they believed Judy when she said there wasn't. Back then, you only had to be 18 to get into bars or buy alcohol, and many of the bars in Chicago never bothered to card anyone, and those that did would easily let you pass if you gave them a 20. So John was turning to alcohol more than anything else. So when he decided to join the Marines, his mother thought it was the best thing he could do, and he was really turning himself around and looking forward to a much better life. Sadly, Gacy took that away after meeting John in a bar and taking him back to his house to party more. John was identified on January 27, 1979, and was labeled body number 20. John's mom went on to sue Gacy for the murder of her son, and she won $1 million settlement. Gacy's lawyer stated that he was unable to pay and didn't have that kind of money, and because of her, he was unable to collect money for his crimes. The judge ruled that any money he was offered for the rights to his story or anything else would be held in an account to pay off the judgment. That of course got several others to sue as well, and over time, that went on to become the law. Perpetrators could not profit from their crimes. I personally think that is one of the best laws there is. Russell Lloyd Nelson was born on September 26, 1956 in Duluth, Minnesota. Russell came to Chicago with another male friend to work for a contractor. He was saving up money for his wedding, and they had been offered a great paying job with room and board, so they jumped at the chance. He was also a student at the University of Minnesota and was studying architecture. Russell called his mom on October 17, 1977 to wish her a happy birthday. He was never heard from again. Although his family and his fiancée contacted the police and reported him missing, they couldn't say for sure who was the contractor. He was identified on January 6, 1979 using dental records and was previously labeled body number 16. His mother recalled that his father had come to Chicago to search for him to no avail. She also recalled that when she testified, Gacy just sat there and stared at her like, "So what? Your son is dead." She says she will never forget that look in Gacy's eye. It was like he enjoyed seeing her pain. Robert David Winch was born on October 19, 1961 in Cleveland, Ohio. His family had moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan, where Bob was placed into a foster home for getting into trouble. He ran away from that foster home to Chicago in late October of 1977. He was last seen alive on November 11, 1977. A distinctive tiger's eye belt buckle was found in Gacy's house that was linked to Bob. He was later identified on September 12, 1979 by distinctive marks on his bones from a previous healed injury. His father never stopped looking for him until he was finally identified. He was previously labeled body number 11 and was buried under Gacy's house with another one of Gacy's victims named Tom Bowling. Tommy Joseph Bowling was born on July 5, 1957 in Maryville, Tennessee. Tom was married to Jolie Bowling and had a 1-year-old son when he went missing in Chicago on November 8, 1977. He, like many others in this video, was last seen at a bar in Chicago. He was meeting a contractor at the bar to discuss a job offer. Cook County Sheriff's Police and Des Plaines Police notified his family in September 1979 that they had found his body on December 21, 1978 in Gacy's crawlspace, but they had not identified it until then. He was previously labeled body number 12 and was buried on top of Robert Winch. David Paul Talsma was born on November 16, 1958 in Chicago, Illinois. He was reported missing in Chicago by his father on December 14, 1977, after having not been seen since December 9, 1977. He was identified through X-rays on what would have been his 21st birthday, November 16, 1979. He was previously labeled body number 17, and he was the 21st victim identified. His leather bomber jacket was found in Gacy's possession. He was believed to have been buried while still alive. William Wayne Billy Kindred was born on July 14, 1958 in Chicago, Illinois. He, like many others, met Gacy at a local bar. Him and his girlfriend hung out with Gacy and others several times before Billy was last seen leaving a different bar on February 16, 1978. Billy was extremely close to his mother Lola, especially after losing his brother Jimmy in 1972, who was only 11 years old when he passed. His girlfriend always suspected Gacy, but no one would really listen to her. Although she was in a near-fatal accident soon after Billy went missing and she ended up being disabled from it, she was still able to testify at Gacy's trial. She was so uncomfortable on the stand with Gacy staring at her that she finally asked the bailiffs to make him stop. She also broke down in tears when shown a photo and was sobbing so much the judge had the jury removed from the courtroom to prevent them from being swayed by emotions. Billy was identified on May 16, 1979, and was previously labeled body number 27. Timothy David O'Rourke was born on October 20, 1957, and lived in Elmhurst, Illinois. He also went to high school with my cousins. Tim loved to go to the bars and dance. He would go disco dancing every chance he got. His inscription on his tombstone even states that. It says, "If among angels in heaven we could glance, we'd see Tim with a smile, doing his disco dance." Tim is believed to have been murdered sometime between June 16 and June 23, 1978. He is also the first victim to have been dumped in the Des Plaines River because there was no more room left in the crawlspace. He was identified on January 9, 1979, and was previously labeled body number 31. Frank William Landingen was born on July 5, 1979 in Chicago, Illinois. He was Gacy's second victim to be dumped in the river. He went missing on November 4, 1978, and was identified on November 14, 1978. His body was found nude in the river on November 12, 1978. He was labeled body number 32. James Mojo Mazzara was born on May 28, 1958 in Chicago, Illinois. James was living in Elmwood Park, which is a suburb outside of Chicago, when he went missing November 23, 1978. Gacy admits to dumping a body into the Des Plaines River called Mojo and said he was found dead in his house. This is Gacy's first attempt to implement others into his crimes. James was identified on December 30, 1978, and was labeled body number 33. Robert Jerome Peast was born on March 16, 1963 in Des Plaines, Illinois. This is the one that finally blew open the doors to Gacy and his horrible crimes. It is very sad it took this long, but again, things were much different back then. The way information was gathered and stored then was so much different than it is nowadays. Everything took time. But if only they would have listened to the families when they first started mentioning Gacy, many of these young boys would have been alive today. Rob was an honor student in school and was very close to his family. He had a job at Nissen Pharmacy and was saving up money so he could buy a car when he got his license. He was working the night he went missing. During his shift, Gacy came in to do a bid on some work they wanted to have done after the holidays. Rob heard Gacy and the owner talking about the job and Gacy making a comment about trying to find more help because he was so buried with work. Rob heard this and thought it would be a great opportunity to make better money. This was on December 11th, 1978. It was his mother's birthday. His mother had come to the pharmacy to pick up Rob to drive him home after his shift. Rob had run out to her as she waited in her car and told her he would be a few more minutes, that he was going to talk to this contractor about a job. He was never seen again. He left out the back door of the building with Gacy. His mom, after waiting around for some time and him not showing back up, really began to worry. It was not like her son. She talked to the owner of the store and got Gacy's information and called him. She got no answer. The owner tried calling Gacy and got nowhere with him as well. The family waited even longer and still nothing. They knew something was very wrong. They called the police. The police actually took the report seriously and decided to not wait the normal 48 hours that they were supposed to back then and started looking into it right away. During the night, the police went to Gacy's home to talk to him. The car that was described to them was parked in the driveway, so they were fairly sure he was home. They knocked and waited at least 10 to 15 minutes and he didn't answer. They walked around to the back of his home and saw him standing in the back room looking out a window. Gacy was a bit startled as they came around the back and finally answered the door for them. He let them in and they were asking him about Rob. Gacy claimed to have left him there. That he did talk to someone for a few minutes, but claims the kid never got into his car or anything. The police were trying to casually look around for any signs. One officer asked to use the bathroom, so Gacy allowed him. He walked him to it, and then as he was talking to the other officer, he made sure to stay within sight of the bathroom. The officer smelled an odor, but couldn't put his finger on what it reminded him of. The police got nowhere with Gacy, and with nothing obvious, they had no choice but to leave. It is believed that Rob was still alive at this time but was unconscious in the attic. Rob was found and identified on April 9, 1979, after his body was found on the edge of the river caught in some weeds, naked. Rob was the last victim that Gacy ended with his own hands, and by the time his body was located, Gacy was already in Cook County Jail, and most of the bodies at his former home were already found. Gacy also confessed to all these crimes and even drew a map of where the bodies were located in the crawl space. However, during his trial, Gacy tried to claim insanity, and when that failed, he tried to claim he didn't do any of it, and then he finally ended up saying that he was afraid of someone else who did the killings and that he just went along with it all out of fear. His famous quote was, "Clowns can get away with murder." Thankfully, Rob put an end to that. As I have previously stated, Rob was the last known victim of Gacy. However, in my opinion, there are at least 3 more victims that should be counted as Gacy's victims. Although their lives were not ended by Gacy's own hands, they were still ended because of Gacy. Those 3 are Jeffrey Rignall, David Cram, and Mike Rossi. Jeff was born on August 21, 1951 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He passed away on Christmas Eve, 2000 in Florida. I consider him a victim of Gacy because in March 1978, Jeff was walking in Rosemont, Illinois when Gacy pulled up alongside of him. Gacy asked him if he wanted a ride and if he wanted to party. Although it was March, it was still pretty cold in Illinois, so Jeff gladly accepted the ride. A very common thing back at that time. That was the mistake Jeff made that began the downward path his life would end up going on. Within minutes of him entering the car, Gacy covered his face with a rag full of chloroform, knocking him out. When he came to, he was in Gacy's home and was restrained. Over the next 24 hours or so, Gacy would brutally assault Jeff over and over and over again. The pain was so bad that he would repeatedly pass out from it. Once he regained consciousness, Gacy would assault him yet again. Finally, Jeff woke up and he was no longer in Gacy's home. He was left outside in Lincoln Park, laying next to a statue in that park, extremely sick and confused. Jeff did go to the police, and the police did want to help him. But he couldn't really give them exact details, like the name or address. Only a description of a car and a partial plate number. Jeff was determined to get this guy, though. He remembered at one point being in Gacy's car on the expressway and going under a specific underpass with a rest area that he recognized. When he got better after the assault, he would spend countless hours sitting in that rest area watching the expressway, hoping to find a car with the partial plate he remembered. He was floored that when a few months later, he actually located the car and was able to follow it. He was able to get Gacy's full plate, his address, as well as provide more information about where everything happened to the police. He also provided information saying he saw Gacy with a few different younger men coming and going from the house on Summerdale. The police were looking into this when Rob went missing. However, it was a different jurisdiction than Des Plaines where Rob was reported to, but at least at this point, everything was starting to come together and they were starting to get a clearer picture of Gacy and his past conviction. After Gacy was arrested and when he admitted to everything, he admitted to the assault on Jeff and stated he had to let him go because he was out of room in his crawl space. He hadn't yet thought of throwing them into the river or of disposing them anywhere else. He said he thought he saw Jeff before at the rest area and figured he was trying to find him. He decided it wasn't worth the risk anymore, so the next few victims went into the river many miles away from where he lived, where they lived or where they were abducted from, but still within driving distance for him to handle. Jeff ended up dying from complications of AIDS. He stated after what Gacy did to him, he didn't feel comfortable being with a woman anymore, so he chose male partners, with him being more of the aggressor. Jeff was a great witness during the trial and was able to expose what most likely happened to the others. Although the details were very hard for families to hear, they at least had some knowledge of what happened to their son and that this monster would never hurt another one again. Jeff went on to also write a book about his encounter with Gacy. He was only 49 when he passed away. David Cram was hitchhiking around Chicago in 1976 when he was picked up by Gacy. For some reason, Cram was able to get away from Gacy on 2 separate occasions when Gacy tried to assault him, but he still stuck around. His sticking around, however, caused him to be accused of being an accomplice of Gacy and the murders he committed. Although he states that he unknowingly dug trenches in the crawl space for bodies, that was the extent of his involvement. Although Gacy tried hard to throw the guilt towards him, he really had no involvement in any of these 33 young men's deaths. His only involvement was digging areas as he was told to do by his boss. The reason why I say he is also a victim of Gacy is because in 2001, Cram committed suicide by hanging himself in a forest preserve in Cook County, Illinois. He couldn't live with all of this and knowing that he helped to dig those areas and that he actually lived in that house for a short period of time above all those bodies. He couldn't handle it. No matter what, there is always help and suicide is not the answer. If you or someone you know is struggling, please get help. All you have to do these days is call or text 988 for help 24/7. Gacy used to say things like a clown can get away with murder while performing his clown acts. Little did people know that was what was happening in real life. Gacy was one of the best liars I ever knew. He was so good that little did we know that he was. I knew several of these victims. I knew several of these families. I got to know even more families as the trial went on and the case played out. A few of these kids may have been runaways or had some run-ins with the law, but not one of them deserved what happened to them. They were more than this, but for so long, they were only remembered by what this horrible person did to them. Their lives were so overshadowed by their number that they became known as. I hope in some small way I helped remind people of their actual names instead of just what happened to them and the number they were assigned when found. To me, there is still so much more to this story. I hope you will continue on my path forward as I continue to share this story with you all.